Good evening. It's 5:35 on August 10th, 2011. It's the monthly meeting of the Urbana Human Relations Commission. Could we please have a roll call?
Aisha Lamb-Sobe.
Here.
Eric Smith.
Here.
Peter Resnick.
Here.
Daniel Larson.
Here.
Lisa Mosley. Carol Bradford. Rizwan Uden. Francis Rigberg Baker.
Here.
And Rita Haber.
Thank you. Moving on to item 2, we need to make a quick change to our agenda. We are going to reverse items 5 and 6. We're going to do new business first and then old business. Are there any other additions, corrections that need to be noted?
Move approval as amended.
Is there a second?
I second it.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? All right, moving on to item 3, our June 8th, 2011 minutes. Any corrections, any additions, any omissions that need to be recorded? Is there a motion?
Move approval.
And a second?
I second it.
All righty. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Fantastic. Moving on to item 4, public participation. Hearing none, seeing none, we're going to move on to new business and turn it over to Todd. Todd, do you have some guests, and
Sure.
would you like to sort of facilitate the next bit, please?
Yes, if you recall from the minutes of the last meeting, there was an initial finding of noncompliance for A&R services, and there was a request that, or a decision to review A&R services to determine whether or not there's going to be an actual finding of noncompliance. So tonight, I have a brief statement in regards to that and recommendation as well. We have Bill Walters from A&R Mechanical Services. I believe he is in operations there to come and speak on their behalf. And then we also have Michelle Brooks, our Assistant City Attorney, who is here to provide you with any guidance in regards to any duties and obligations that you have when trying to determine whether good faith efforts are made. I have a way of thinking about that, but certainly she's available. She's more familiar with the case law.
Thank you both for coming.
So in terms of my initial statement, what I'd like to say is that since the initial finding of noncompliance occurred, A&R has been exceptionally cooperative in providing information. In front of you, there's a packet that starts with an email from Kim Heath. She's the Human Resources Manager there, that has a series of items that sort of documents what they've done in terms of their good faith compliance efforts. In addition to that, one of the things that I have begun to suggest to contractors who are having some type of compliance difficulty is something that we used to do back in the hospital compliance world, which is also a standard practice of the Department of Justice when they're trying to get someone into compliance, is that you basically have some type of action plan for them that is designed to help them basically as a comprehensive dashboard for all of the various things that they could be doing in order to secure compliance, have an assigned person or personnel, and also a date. And what generally the regulatory agency will do in that case will be to monitor ongoing that entity, whether or not it's an organization, a contractor, or hospital, to make sure that they are complying with the compliance plan that was laid out for them. For me, in terms of compliance, the point of compliance is not to prohibit people from contracting, not to disbar people, it is to bring them into compliance. So as someone who sort of has that goal in mind, to see a plan that's put together basically structured around our good faith efforts with timetables and goals, that is a very strong sign for me, a very encouraging sign that the company is willing to take accountability and move forward with their serious efforts towards achieving compliance. At this point, I would recommend to staff that you approve ANR with a pendency that they continue to comply with the plan as they have laid out. And does everyone know that what I'm referring to? You actually received two today. This is the one that doesn't have specific names, and the person responsible just has job titles, which is fine. So at this point, it would be my recommendation that you move forward with approving ANR services for at minimum a 6-month, which would allow them to get through the most of the items that are enumerated in the compliance plan. And I'm happy to take any questions. If you don't have any, then certainly you can move on.
And by move on, you mean?
Move on to the actual contractor statement.
Gotcha. So one of my questions is, and maybe Michelle, you want to speak to this as well. There's the issue of how we can get a company into compliance in the future. What I want to understand is our responsibility as far as the ordinance and as far as our bylaws and procedures go. If we find that a company has not, over some period of time, complied, is it incumbent upon us, either required or part of our option, to say, look, whether or not they're willing to comply going forward into the future, they have already violated their contract, they've already breached their contract because they have not complied over some period of time. Is that an option open to us? Is it a responsibility of ours to undertake that?
So I had an opportunity to review the rules several times this week, and also to review the underlying code. When you read the rules, and I thought of printing them, that just would have been one more thing to print out. What tended to stand out to me is that generally, and actually I went to the Office of Federal Contract Compliance to read the rules also, really a lot of this depends on the way that you define compliance. And I think the underlying thrust of our rules, as well as all of the other agencies that I've read, is that compliance means that when the administrative official or the regulatory agency comes to you and says, you have a problem, we need you to fix it. If the agency or if the entity that's seeking compliance is cooperative in those efforts, if they institute, again, good faith efforts towards achieving whatever goal is laid in front of them, that constitutes compliance. And so you can't look back, or at least in my reading, does not really see where the rules anticipate that we would look back over a period of time and say, over the last 6 months, we see here that you have really horrible numbers. Or we see that, we don't think that there were as many efforts being made as should have been being made, and as a result of that, even though you're willing to be compliant going forward, we're going to penalize you retroactively. Right,
but we've got a different situation here, right? This is a renewal, and as far as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, what was the initial certification for this company back in 2009?
I think probably was 6 months.
Okay.
And let me clarify. If the Human Relations Office would have gone to this company and said, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, and they hadn't have done X, Y, and Z in order to comply, that would be noncompliance. I think it's pretty simple that would be noncompliance. Failure to meet particular goals, particular affirmative action goals, is not considered noncompliance in this field.
And as far as the ordinance goes, are we to find compliance, or are we to find
compliance?
Compliance is the terminology.
Non-compliant entity. So the word is compliance.
You said this document came out of hospitals in general, as management style?
The approach behind it.
I mean,
so
not the document itself, but the approach, the philosophy.
Yes, and it's like, for instance, if a hospital is found to be out of compliance with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS, they will often create some type of action plan, which is called a compliance plan, that will have set goals in it at set dates certain that will need to be completed by the hospital. And so this is generally how sort of the compliance industry achieves compliance.
And you're saying it does, achieves compliance. What about success? I mean, I know that's hard to quantify, but, I mean, I don't want you to, just in general, what's your philosophy on the success of something like this?
Well,
Real-
the success legally, my understanding is judged by the effort made,
Okay,
not by
that's fine, and that's
the result,
good.
not by the outcome, ultimately.
You personally, what do you think about the outcome when something like this is?
I think if a company is, again, in good faith, and I think that we can monitor that ongoing, particularly with the compliance plan, if they are making these efforts, then, and still not achieving results, then I think then is the time that we can begin, and I think we are beginning to look at the other problems, the other parts of the system. For instance, we've discussed in the past the unions,
Right.
and we actually have the information for the unions now in my office that we can begin to contact and have come in and meet either individually or as a council, or as a commission with the entire commission. But it gives us basically an ability to say that at least in this part of the system, we are taking the reasonable efforts that anyone could expect an organization to take in order to achieve the results.
Okay, thank you.
So one further thing. When a company applies to us for certification, they provide an affirmative action policy, I expect. I think they're required to, are they not?
They are required to provide an affirmative action policy by the code. We require that they provide an EEO statement.
Okay. One of the things that I take it we are trying to determine is not just whether they comply with our requests, but also whether they comply with their own policy, correct?
Correct.
And as I read the ordinance, there's a series of things that they are to submit to us. So the compliance is with their own policies. It's compliance with the list of things that they're supposed to do in order to qualify to be a contractor.
Correct.
Okay. So the other question I had was, with regard to the 6-month letter you're sending out now, you are not sending to them any further things that they need to comply with? You are simply sending them we are concerned and we would like things to change?
We're saying we're concerned, we'd like things to change, and if you don't have demonstrated good faith efforts the next time around, you will be deemed non-compliant, something like that. I can pull out the letter if you'd like.
Okay.
Fran?
I have a question. This compliance plan, it says on it, company name,
Yes.
that's our A&Rs.
Yes, and the
Okay.
one there is one that we have that has actual names in the individual name.
Yeah, okay.
It's just that the companies didn't go and fill it out on the spreadsheet.
That's all right. It seems to me that this is the critical document, and when we make judgments about companies, we have to just look at various things, but it's kind of like a prima facie. It looks like they must be doing something right, or it looks like maybe something has gone wrong or was never right in the first place. And the only way we can really get a handle on that's going to be objective, if it have any really evidence-based, is going to be if we're sure that this plan is what we want it to be, and that the things that we may be possibly concerned about are addressed in here. For example, A&R lost a high percentage of African American employees. So I want to see in the compliance plan this last item. Review of the company's policy obligations, and that includes hiring, assignment, layoff, termination, et cetera. So I think that's important, in this particular case, that's in there because that may be an area of possible concern. So I think the compliance plan is great, and I kind of feel the way Todd did, that this looks pretty good to me. I mean, as if we can have anything that measures good faith, it would be something like this. So I'm pleased with it.
Other questions for Todd or comments?
No, again, we still have an
Oh,
individual
yeah.
from the contractor. But
Yep.
yeah, any questions? from
Initial
me?
questions for
Yes.
Todd. Okay, Todd?
Okay.
think we'll wrap.
Mr. Walton, please come up.
As said before by Mr. Wren, which I appreciate, my name is Bill Walter. I'm the operations manager at A&R and our services. First of all, I want to make the statement that we've appreciated the cooperation that Mr. Wren has had with our company. Unfortunately, Ms. Heath, who is our human resources manager, could not be here tonight, but she reports directly to me, and the discussion that we had with each other in the rhetoric and the progress that we made with Mr. Wren, we felt was very productive, and appreciated that whole approach and the process in general. One of the things I kind of want to address, and first of all, I appreciate the committee for taking our statement tonight. I want to read off of one of the documents that we drew together for Mr. Rent, and it's the affirmative action goals. And just to kind of make that statement, and I also want to make a statement that A&R as a company in whole has been in Urbana since 1925, and we value the relationship that we have with Urbana and the city. So this is very important to us. If there are corrections that need to be made, we want to make those corrections, and as Mr. Rent said, in full good faith effort to make sure we're in compliance. So A&R Services is currently underrepresented by women, minorities, and persons with disabilities in our semi-skilled job categories. Because this represents more than half of our workforce, it is an area of great concern. However, as a union contractor, we are limited by the actuality that we must hire in this job category from the local unions. A&R must utilize the candidates which are made available through the union. Management, this is our promise, management will work diligently with the local union representatives to promote openings when they occur in the apprenticeship programs to recruit women, minorities, and persons with disabilities. A&R will continue to restructure jobs to accommodate apprentices or trainees when possible, and every effort will be made to retain the employment of women, minorities, and persons with disabilities. Now, that's just part of the information that we've put together, and it's a statement that we as a company are standing by. I think part of the question here is, I'd like to see numbers. I'd like to see hard, factual data in results. Unfortunately, sometimes those action plans, the action items that we've been asked to do, which we are wholeheartedly buying into and planning on moving forward with as based off of Mr. Rent's comments, there's no guarantee necessarily those numbers are going to be there. And we need you as a committee to be understanding to that. We will make every effort possible to make those numbers change because we want to see an improvement. However, I would ask that the committee would consider the good faith efforts that we are making for that to move forward, and to consider the fact that if there are other areas outside of our company's influence itself that we can make to help improve those types of statistics, we will make those efforts as well. So that's our company's stance. We appreciate the time that you've taken to review this case, and we would appreciate compliance be reinstated so we can continue to work for the city.
Thank you, sir. Question? Peter.
So let me start by first thanking you for coming down, and I do want to start off by saying I don't want the impression to come across that we think there's some sort of overt effort on the part of A&R to do something bad. We base stuff on outcome, and so insofar as whatever the outcome was and whatever the reasons for the outcome, we want to see that change. But we understand that there are impediments you're going to run into, both current economics and if you're dealing with unions or other things about the community that are making it hard for you to accomplish the goals. I think the Commission is very open to that. And as a matter of fact, if you're running into those impediments, we want to hear about them so that if they're external to A&R, we can address those as well. That said, I've got a couple of questions about the difference between the numbers in 2009 that we saw and the numbers in 2011. What I want to get an idea about is certainly the number of employees hasn't overall changed, or at least the last count that we've seen. But there have been a rebalancing that is obviously not great in terms of affirmative action. Can you tell us what the overall churn was in that period of time? How many employees did you lose? How many did you hire? And what you did in that intervening period to accomplish your affirmative action goals that didn't happen for whatever reasons.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Resnick. Thank you very much for understanding sometimes the external circumstances that are imposed upon us. And as a company, to kind of address one of your first questions, I feel like I need to maybe further explain our industry a little bit to lay some groundwork to help you understand how our business works. And I think this might have been in some of the documentation you submitted, Mr. Rent. Either way, in the excavation, concrete, site utilities industry, it is very highly cyclical when it comes to weather. You know, outside of general construction and building trades, which can go year-round, depending on what type of project it is. This is the type that we see high layoffs, and then we you know, it'll turn around, and the next spring we'll see high employment back in our numbers. What we're dealing with is a limited pool of employees to call back, and they make that very clear as well. We have our policy and the policy with the unions. We have first callback rights with our employees, and as shown by some of our records, we will always call back the people who are familiar with our systems and who are familiar with working with our management teams. And because of that, it's kind of like a hot commodity. We want to keep those guys working, but sometimes we lose individuals, and they might be of different ethnicity, they might be of different gender, to other contractors who pick them up before our work picks up. And to us, we feel like that can sometimes be a competitive blow because we've worked with those individuals, they know our systems, but contractors started work, maybe a project a little bit before us, and before we can hire everyone back, you know, we're out those individuals. And a lot of that is characterized by the solid workforce that we have with our minorities, with the different gender relations, and all kinds. So to us, we look at people as being good workers, okay? We're pulling them back because we want a job to be done and done well. So when we look at it that way, we know that there needs to be improvements in the ability to pull those types of individuals from the local unions, and we want that opportunity. So that being said, that cyclical rise and fall is difficult to deal with, as well as the competition of other contractors in the area that can pick up those individuals.
So let me see if I understand you. The number 28, which includes management, so I don't know what your overall actual workforce is besides management, but the number of folks who are actually working for you during the construction season is a stable number year to year, and or more or less, and it's the pool of people who are coming in that particular season that we're seeing the change in the demographics of.
That is correct.
Right. Okay. So, right, 10 craft workers, 14 operatives or semi-skilled workers is so 24 was the number that we got of folks who are not in management or clerical. That's about right.
That is correct.
And 24 is pretty stable season to season.
I would say, I mean, the new numbers that we show here from August 1st, I don't know if they have that document yet. Oh, I apologize. I'll quickly read off the new numbers that we do have.
Sure.
Total employed, 63, total female being 7, total white being 59, total female workers, white, 7, total African-American, 3, total Hispanic, 1. So we've seen a shift there again. It's a bump, I think, from those past numbers.
I'm sorry, the total employment was what?
63.
63?
Yeah.
Up from 28?
It was 28 the total in 2008, 2009.
I've got 28 listed on this for 2009 and 2011.
So let me
Yeah.
make sure we make a clarification. Are you talking about A&R services or A&R mechanic? Or
Oh, I'm
A&R
sorry. I think
Oh,
that's a
okay, good.
combination there. I apologize.
Yeah.
No,
And I'm sorry, we discussed this, or at least I discussed this with Kim, and we thought it would be better to have the combined, the presentation at least, cover.
No, that's fine. I
apologize.
just,
Yeah,
the
those
numbers weren't.
don't match up with what
Yeah.
you're looking at.
Okay. So for the combined numbers, but the number of,
For services, it'd be very close to what you're saying.
Okay.
Fluctuating few here and there. Yes.
gotcha. And that's also cyclical as far as the construction season. So the churn rate is kind of a false thing in your industry. You're seeing a bunch of people laid off for the season, a bunch of rehires, and some of them are in common and some of them are not.
That's correct.
You mentioned as one issue that you're facing is that some of the folks who are of different backgrounds, you just simply didn't have the opportunity to hire.
That's correct.
So when that happens, do you then go to the union to ask for more folks?
We do. And as we ask the unions for more personnel, we make those requests for anyone who's qualified based on the skill set, and we're broken down by laborers have different classifications. Finishers have different classifications. And so how we hire is we ask for the specific job. There will be different functions within that job. You'll have a laborer who specializes in a certain area of handling material. You'll have a finisher who specializes in curb and gutter. And those are the things that we have to hire based to make sure that our jobs are going to go according to plan.
Right.
And so because of that, the unions will then go through their process of finding that qualified individual, and the first one that's available on the list based off of the term that they've been sitting there, it will come up, and they have the opportunity to actually reject that job. Okay, so that's another component I didn't know if you're familiar with, but that can be said. If we made a request, we needed a laborer or a finisher for 3 days. It was just a job that would take 3 days. We would make a call into the hall. The hall would then give the opportunity to that person who's on the list, and we always ask if there's the opportunity to employ anyone who is minority or disabled. That opportunity needs to be there. It needs to be presided there, and we are asking for that as well. So they are understood. It is understood through the unions that we are looking for that type of help. So that being said, it is then up to the union personnel to either accept or reject that position. And then they go back down the list until someone accepts and we have a worker on site.
If I might interject, I have a question.
Please, Aisha.
It's a little
Okay,
difficult to hear.
Do you worry that you don't have, perhaps not even just your company, but the entire construction community, that you have the opposite problem of many other people in the country who aren't in hiring, that you don't have enough qualified individuals, period, to do the work?
Well,
Or there are just always lots of, I don't mean to say white people, but I'm just saying, do you have people, period, enough qualified people to fill your positions?
I can say right now, you can see a trend. We are starving for qualified workers. We go through a hiring hall for a reason. It's a collective bargaining agreement. That's put in place so that we have, as a contractor, readily accessible to personnel that can perform the job. So that being said, I would love to see more skilled workers come into the workforce that we have access to that fit the criteria of minorities, disability, or females. That I am not involved in the day-to-day operation of how that recruitment happens through the unions. So I can't speak for the unions. I can only speak as the contractor. I hope that answers your
do you
question.
know, is there any I guess I'd say, any sort of advertising process or attempt to bring people from outside the community, for example, to move in? Or is it just that it's too big of a drag to have a job just for 3 days?
Well, I can speak on behalf of A&R Services. We aren't involved in any type of outside advertisement for that personnel to join those unions. However, as you would see in our compliance packet, we want to be a partner with the unions in trying to bring those types of individuals the opportunity to work within our locals. And I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, the more exposure that you can have with the community, with minority communities, with any type of ethnicity, to expose them to the trades is a benefit to the contractor and the unions as a whole. The way that I look at it, we need skilled workers. And today, as a point of just personal opinion, I apologize if I'm getting off topic, but a lot of our youth today don't know the type of opportunities that are there for tradesmen. Tradesmen make good money. In an economy that is pretty difficult, they make good money. And, I would love to see the youth in the high schools. I mean, you don't hear any more of these trade classes. You don't hear any more of the opportunity for kids to work with their hands. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of pride in working with your hands and creating a living for yourself and providing for your family. So I'm a huge advocate of that exposure at an earlier level, an educational level. So hopefully we can work together with the unions to provide that type of resource to the local educational institutions.
Thank
I have
you.
a question for you real quick. Actually, I have a couple, but while we're on the topic of trying to recruit, does your organization participate in apprenticeship programs?
We do, and those are
Okay.
federally regulated
Right.
apprenticeships. Yeah.
And so then is the way that those are structured, do you not have the opportunity to recruit individuals who you'd like to see go through an apprenticeship program and bring them on to your company?
I am not as familiar with the actual regulations, and I apologize. But my understanding is that there is some type of application process with the unions for the apprenticeship.
Mhm.
And I think in our compliance document, we had actually talked about encouraging the application of minorities and different ethnicities and disabled individuals to apply to the unions. I think that was part of our compliance request. But currently, we do not do any such action like that.
Okay. I guess, the follow-up question to that would be, to what extent and you may not be able to answer the question because I don't know if you're intimately involved in the whole process. But the way I'm thinking is, if you have sort of a program or process in place to sort of that's geared towards trying to recruit individuals into an apprenticeship program, because those who are already journeymen usually come from the list in the local. That to me is another sort of a good faith effort that I don't necessarily see at this point, and you may be doing it and just not aware of it. And so, I think that might be an alternative for you, and something to consider as part of your overall sort of good faith efforts. The other thing was you said that you contacted the unions in order to get more individuals whenever you have work. Is that contact in writing, or is it just a simple phone call? As someone who typically says document everything,
Right.
So
Right.
so if you're trying to document your good faith efforts, if you're calling the hall and asking for new laborers,
Right.
is that done just verbally in writing, or some other way?
That would be a better question for our human resources manager.
Mhm.
All requests are processed through her, but I'm pretty confident that we do have a documentation process that we go through. It's something that our project manager will then contact our HR manager and say, listen, we need to get some more help either for this project or for a future project. We're planning on that. And I'm pretty sure that there's some type of form that is filled out. Oh, good, you have an example of that. Perfect. We found it. Great.
So this is a list of individuals who the union will send to your company for consideration.
Well, I want to make sure we're looking at the
Yeah,
same
okay.
document
It's-
real
okay.
quick.
Sorry.
It's called quarterly applicant tracking.
Quarterly
Second-
applicant tracking.
Second
yes.
quarter, 2011.
Absolutely. Yes, that's correct. And one thing that I want to point out here, just so you can see as an example, not only do we track the application, but we track the termination date as well. And if you see, we would like to take pride in the fact that there was no discrimination there whatsoever. That's a point of reference.
So let me ask you about this. You go to the union, you say, we need X number of laborers, X number of operations people with these skill sets. They provide you with folks. Do you then have an opportunity to interview those folks and can pass on them? Or you're pretty much, you've got to take who they give you?
No, we take who they give us, and the only way that they would not be employed with us is if they're not providing the type of work or the level of work that is required per the skill set that was requested.
So, given that, and that's what I thought I was hearing, there's a couple of things in the compliance plan that I'm not sure how you can comply with. So one of the things you've got is encourage present minority and female employees to recruit other minority persons. There was at least one other, partner with minority and female recruitment sources, but you can't accomplish those goals. The union has to accomplish those goals. Am I not correct?
Well, I think, Mr. Rent, did you help put this together?
Yeah, and in the discussion with Ms. Heath, one of the things that was one of the questions she asked me, and of course, for the unionized workforce, that is true. In terms of the other workforce,
Oh, sure.
they have the freedom to do that.
Yeah. Although I take it that the rest of the management and clerical workforce is relatively small compared to the unionized workforce.
That's correct. But one statement I'd like to make on side of that, we don't feel like it is the sole responsibility of the union to encourage that type of proactive approach in trying to recruit minorities and different ethnicities and disabled individuals to apply and try to get involved with the unions. So that's something that we feel no problem in encouraging throughout our organization as well.
Because I don't think anything on here sort of precludes you from participating in some activity to try and get more individuals into the union halls. I mean, you have to feed the pipeline in order to get them, so.
Right.
I have one question I'd like to ask. Do you participate in any kind of job fairs?
I didn't catch the last one.
Is ANR
Yeah.
ever involved in a
Job
job
fairs.
fair or
No.
open house? Or
Not really, mainly because the individuals that work at our company are from the union halls, so it's not necessarily a activity we've ever been involved with that I know of, but might be a good idea to start that as well, and I think that might somewhere be involved in there. There it is. In one of the action plans, it states that it would be beneficial for us to make a more concerted effort at the recruiting and training of individuals that could be with our company.
do you feel that you have the relationship with the unions to do this? Is it healthy enough? I mean, are you what is
Oh,
what's the? Is it,
Absolutely.
I don't. There's no reason to be adversarial, but
No.
But you've referenced several times sort of almost a partnership. Is that common, or are you doing anything like that in other
Right.
capacities with the unions?
I would say, for
Partnerships
example, from a few different locals, we have the ability to be on a few committees, and we appreciate that opportunity to work with the union personnel in discussing the issues of the day. And by far, this is a big issue that we want to address and try to come to a commonality on. That being said, we have a good relationship with the unions, and the unions provide us with the quality and qualified labor that we need to provide our jobs. But we can definitely improve in the type of mix that's involved with that job pool.
Sorry, Fran, to cut you off.
Has A&R always been a union shop?
We have since 1925.
Okay. I just wanted to say I admire that. I think that's great.
Thank you.
And I think this is an interesting time because of your history with them and your commitment to working people's rights, that you have an opportunity through your relationship with the union and all this to make this better all around and to make these changes that I think we'd all like to see. with more opportunity for minorities, et cetera. So, thanks.
Just one question. Do you track what happens when, what happens to your minority employees once you call them back? For instance, if you had 4 last time and now all of a sudden, you have work and they're not available, do you track
Right.
that they're just not available, not interested?
What I would say, and I can't answer in complete confidence, but I'm pretty sure this is the process. When we request those individuals, and since specified minorities, we will make that good faith effort to bring them back, of course, first with the other crews. And if they are not able to come back, we want to know why. And I think it is disclosed to us whether they are with another contractor or whether they've just refused the ability to come work for us.
Right. Okay.
One last question. How much communication have you folks had so far with the unions since we started reviewing this and we've asked you to come here?
Well, I can refer to one of the documents. I think that's included in your packet, Mr. Rent. We sent a letter out to all of the locals that we are in a collective bargaining agreement with, and I don't know if you have that to refer to. It's
Yeah, it's
June
toward the
13th.
back of the
Yes.
packet. There's quite a few of them.
That is correct. So all of the locals we've sent that out to.
And so you've sent letters. Have you had any conversations with folks at the unions about these? Have you gotten any feedback about these?
I would say that would probably be a better question for Ms. Heath, who's not here. She would have been in communication with them. But my overall feeling and sense from the discussions we've had as a management team is that the unions are accepting of this, are open and willing to discuss and put it on the table.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional comments or questions? Great. Todd?
Thank you.
No,
Thanks.
thank you so
Thank you
much for
very
coming
much.
down. Thank you for taking the time. Have a nice evening.
So again, I'd remind you that if you have any questions during your deliberative process, Michelle is available.
Okay.
Otherwise, for your discussion and vote.
Yeah.
You want a motion for purposes of discussion?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so for purposes of discussion, I'm happy to move that we approve A&R Mechanical for 6 months.
I second.
Is there a second?
Aisha seconded.
All righty. Discussion, please. Comments, questions, thoughts. Peter?
So this was all very good to hear, and I appreciate the what we heard. The ordinance does require that contractors not associate or hire from labor organizations that do not comply with our ordinance. I'm not sure how far down that path we want to go this evening. I don't think we can, really. I think, though, that's a discussion that we really need to have at some point. To date, we have not seen documentation from labor unions. We actually would need to, I think, develop a procedure in order to collect that data from the labor unions involved and do that. I think that's a serious next step that we need to take given the information we're hearing tonight. But that said, I think I'm satisfied that we can ask Todd to look at this compliance program with A&R, continue to follow up with them for the next 6 months, report back, see how things are going, and in the meanwhile, that we should undertake, first procedures and then looking at union hiring practices, union recruitment, and it sounds to me like A&R is certainly willing to work with us to communicate with the union about ideas and going forward. So I'm comfortable with the 6 month at this point, and I'm pleased with what I've heard so far.
Thank you, Peter. Other comments, questions? Eric, Fran, Aisha? Fran?
Just like to echo what Pete said about, I found this whole thing very productive, and I think it was very important for making things better in the future and taking more of a look at the unions, and and I think it's just very healthy for our city. So
Thank you.
I'm glad it was done and that it worked out well.
Any other comments or questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion on the floor of a 6-month certification, please say aye.
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 Opposed, the same? All right. Thank you, folks, for coming down. Have a nice evening. Let's, now we're going to go back and review a few issues of old business. Todd, we have an update on the, we have several updates, either the IDOT traffic study or the discrimination workshop.
So the easy one is the IDOT, or the discrimination workshop.
Yeah, that was
Really?
That was nice wishful thinking there.
So, subject to correction by Tony, I believe that we're scheduled for August 26th here.
That's the Friday night, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
At 5. I'm sorry. Yes, it's the party night. At 5:30.
Will emails circulate?
Yes, we'll circulate email. It'll be a public meeting. It'll be broadcast. Mr. Jackson will be here to discuss new developments in the EEO law, to provide a foundation for basis, to deal with the fundamentals of EEO law and the fundamental types of discrimination and the proofs that are needed, but also to provide an update on some of the recent decisions that have been made. And depending on our time, I've actually prepared a brief presentation. I'm not exactly sure that'll be the place that I give it, but basically, particularly since this is going to be broadcast and rebroadcast, basically telling people if they feel that they're being discriminated on their job or they have some questions about it, sort of general do's and don'ts about what, because if you come to me after you've stormed out of your employer, I could bring you any number of stories. You're at times severely limiting your ability to recover. And so I'd like to provide that information to employees and also some to employers in regards to monitoring that in terms of your management behavior. So it is a fairly brief presentation. I'm not sure if we're going to have time that night, but I'll be working with Mr. Jackson to determine that.
So along those lines, and this applies to your conversations with Mr. Jackson about the presentation he's going to make, I would love that kind of presentation to not just include employment. I would hope that we could talk a little bit about other kinds of discrimination that might occur that's under our ordinance. And I know that the more we grow the area, the longer the meeting and the more information that's packed in.
Well, certainly we can address it, but I guess from a practical and resource standpoint, we deal with 95%.
I absolutely understand. And to that, I would say it's probably then most important for Mr. Jackson to spend the bulk of his time on employment stuff. But if you're developing a how-to guide for folks who are discriminated against, I get the feeling some of the reason that 95% of or 99% of what you're dealing with is discrimination is not only because that's where most of the discrimination is occurring, but that's what most people understand. And so having some public education about if you're being discriminated in housing, these are the things that you probably want to do might change those numbers a little for what it's worth.
The changes in the employment arena, are they in any way a bellwether of changes in these other areas, or is it?
I hope not. Sorry. That was
Well,
what I will say is this: there have been several recent
relation.
decisions that have been sort of groundbreaking in the employment realm. There are some other things that have gone on in other realms, for instance, disability, where recently, I think it was in 2008, there were amendments to the American with Disabilities Act that sort of solidified the, particularly in the area of determining whether or not the individual is either disabled or regarded as or perceived to be disabled. So I think what had happened, the way it was described to me by the EEOC, by a couple of guys over there, is that the members of Congress were not pleased with the narrowing of that category in determining who is disabled and who is not disabled, that it occurred in the wordsmithing that it occurred at the court level. And so they wanted to once again sort of demark for the courts what they consider to be disabled. And so there has been some progress, at least from my standpoint, in that regard. There have been a couple of employment decisions that have been handed down recently that have very, varied types of impact on sort of the day-to-day operations of how we conduct our business. And so I think it's important to sort of get those across to everyone. In fact, one of the cases actually came out of Peoria, Illinois, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it's an extremely important case. And I think it's going to be more important going forward based upon the fact that many of the organizations, it's a case that deals with a company's liability for a supervisor's discriminatory conduct or activity where there was a higher person, like a personnel manager or a human resources manager, who actually made the final employment decision. And it's when are they liable when that manager made a decision in good faith, but somehow the information was tainted based upon the supervisor's animus or racial animus. And so, or not just racial animus, but just whatever the protected class is animus. In that case, it was a military case. It was anti-military bias, but I think it has implications all across the board. And I think everybody who argued the case and looked at it knew that at the time. That type of thing. No, well, that one's interesting. That was a very interesting result and somewhat unexpected, at least by the people I talked to, but yeah. So any other questions about that? And then in regards to the IDOT, the only thing I wanted to do at this point, at least on my part, is to review the recommendations that were made by my office, let you know that we are continuing to make progress in those recommendations. The first recommendation was that UPD at least explore the feasibility of modifying stop cards. These are the cards that are filled out at the time of the traffic stop, to include, number one, the reason for citations, and number two, the number of citations given during that particular stop. That will give us some very critical key information, particularly in regards to Latino or Hispanic stops, as to the reasons as to the higher level or disproportionate amount of ticketing that's going on there. So that's number one. Number two, the recommendation was that UPD continue to work with HRO, the HRC, and CPRB to expand training on non-biased policing. So that means bringing people in, qualified trainers, and we've got a couple of people in mind who do a very good job with it, to basically expand training for the police department, but also do some training and I would say more so forums and encounters with the community also and the police at the same time, to try to increase awareness, increase the level of sort of empathetic understanding by both groups. Next is to continue to work with the neighborhood groups to balance police presence, neighborhood safety, and effective resource deployment. Basically what that means is we know that the vast majority of the disparity that exists is driven by particular geocodes. And that was evident in the years that were surveyed, and it is evident in the 2010 numbers also. And those are clustered around particular neighborhoods. What I think is absolutely imperative that the city do is that we engage those neighborhoods in ongoing conversations about the level of police activity that's occurring there, and that we hear from the people themselves in the neighborhoods as to how they feel about the level. And if there are issues, if there are problems, which there very well may be, we begin to address and deal with those problems on that level, because it is the clusters of disproportionality that are driving the larger disparity in the numbers that we're seeing. So that's that. And
So is
finally, I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask the chief about that point. Is that not being done at all right now then?
No, they have conversations ongoing with neighborhood groups all the time.
Okay, that they do.
And so this would be specifically targeted for those areas of greatest disproportionality. So right now, it may be somewhat diffuse. There may be people from this neighborhood and that neighborhood, all of them sort of together. What we want to do is pull out the geocodes with the greatest disparity, find a location in that area to go have a meeting and go sit down and talk to the people and continue to talk to the people.
And we do those meetings are happening as
Right
we
now,
speak?
the meetings are happening with various neighborhood groups, and I don't even want to begin to try and name them.
That's, no,
But
I
it's
don't.
The groups like SUNA,
It doesn't,
WUNA,
I'm just,
HUNA.
what's the
Um,
relationship like? I mean, is it?
I think right now,
better? Is
the
it-
police are, at least my understanding is that they are working with individuals in all of the neighborhoods, not just the ones that are disproportionate, but all of the neighborhoods, to try and make sure that everyone feels that there's effective, efficient law enforcement that's occurring in their neighborhoods. And you do have several neighborhood organizations that are meeting regularly. You have the Neighborhood Safety Task Force that meets regularly, all of those groups that are currently going. This would just be an additional effort to hit those areas with the highest disparity.
At that IDOT meeting, there was, Joe Cruz and other people seemed to be calling for something more, something, I'm not sure what, but I'm really not sure what they're looking for. It seems to me that we have in place all the sorts of bodies that we would need, bodies of people, to become more effective with this and expand and do the things you're talking about. Do you think what's your professional opinion? Do you think we need more, somehow more? We have various commissions and committees that we need more of that? Something a little different to accomplish this?
I certainly think that the chief made a recommendation that he would like to pull together people, representatives from the HRC, from the CPRB, from the Neighborhood Task Force, to sit down with them and go over the numbers on a continual basis. That seems very reasonable to me. These are people that have been selected, appointed, and vetted by the mayor, by the current administration, who are currently sort of responsibly serving in other roles. That, for me, sounds like a reasonable approach.
So it's basing it on what we have and just pulling it together, making like a meta committee to a task force for this particular problem?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, that sounds good.
Can I actually, just one more recommendation, and then you guys can. And then finally, to continue to review officer stop statistics to identify and diagnose and remediate any significant deviations from the norm. So currently what's happening, and I think they've redoubled the efforts, to look at individual officers, and those that are deviating from the norm will be, first of all, they will be evaluated, they will be monitored. I know they've been doing that, and actually from the data itself, I would be hard-pressed to think that data that's this large would be driven by a couple of rogue officers. I don't see that. This is heavy policing in the disparate, or heavy policing in certain areas. And so, but what they're going to continue to do to make sure that that's not occurring is to monitor to make sure that officers are not deviating too far from the norm. And that has to be based upon assignment, shift, all of those other characteristics. Oh, and one more thing I will say this, because I've been personally involved in this over the last 2 years. I'm not exactly sure, I don't think that there have been any police officer hirings that have occurred over the last 2 years where I've not sat in on the interviews, and that sometimes constitutes 30 interviews, 35 interviews. We're constantly interviewing, and I think when we actually are able to publish the numbers again from July 1st, 2011, what you'll see is that the police department has again redoubled efforts to increase minority hiring. They have been, my experience, they have done a very, very good job with that. They continue to do a good job with that. They continue to push the envelope in trying to reach out and recruit qualified minorities to the police force. So, that's it for me.
Peter, pardon me.
So let me start this comment by saying that Todd and I spoke yesterday, and just between my travel and having a nasty cold last week, I never got a chance to sit down with him after the meeting. So none of what I'm about to say should be surprising to him. And we had a great conversation, and I think we understand what happened and why it happened the way it did. That said, as I expressed to Todd, I was exceedingly disappointed with the outcome of the meeting last month. A lot of that, I think, has to do with us not level setting what we wanted out of the meeting, and I think not doing enough preparation beforehand to talk about what needed to happen at that kind of meeting. I was expecting a lot more ability for the public to engage us, not just have presentations and then statements and then end of discussion. And I think that was just, we didn't plan it terribly well, and you know, I think we all take a little heat for that, but I don't know that that was foreseeable. The other thing that happened that I was most disappointed in is I think we didn't start off with what I think is obvious. There's an issue here. There's a serious problem here. Whatever the causes, there is some sort of disparity going on, and it needs to be dealt with. And I think because we've had a lot of background from Todd over the months of what kinds of statistics and what we were going to be looking at, we had some idea, I think, going in that the statistics were a mess and weren't going to provide us clear, obvious answers to a bunch of questions that we had. I was astounded and that when we looked at the data that came out, which was unfortunately graduate student level work, but when we looked at that data, even that, it was clear that, for instance, police calls, the number of police calls in a particular area is not related to the disparity. And when Todd and I were talking yesterday, this concept that, well, police calls, be careful, that's separate from actual number of police hours in any particular community, which may be much higher and may account for much more of the disparity, but that data wasn't looked at. We don't have population data, let alone driver data for each of the areas where the police are. So we were going into this meeting relatively blind with what was a relatively poor sampling of the data and a poor analysis of the data. And then to have the meeting set up the way it was, we came out with the wrong outcome. And as I expressed to Todd yesterday, and I'm glad to hear that one of his priorities is community engagement. I think we need to continue that community engagement. One of the other things, just as a small point but an important point, is we didn't have enough preparation with the police chief and the assistant chief to talk about how they were going to present what they were going to do. And so we ended up, which was a useful piece of information, seeing the tape of a traffic stop. I think that's interesting and probably necessary for us to see. But what was being presented to us as a typical traffic stop turned out to be not very typical at all. It involved a middle-of-the-night stop of a Hispanic male, which ended up in a custodial arrest. And if that is typical, then we've got a much different problem. Now, I know that that's probably not why it was shown, and I know that there was probably other information that was trying to be conveyed, but that's what we ended up with. So I think we have to make a different kind of attempt to have a different kind of community engagement on this in the future. And I think we do need to continue these discussions. And one of the things that I'm going to try and do, Todd and I talked a little bit about yesterday, is I'm going to talk to a couple of city council folks and see if we can get some involvement from them, because I do think it needs to be political leadership as well as administrative staff who need to be involved in this, the police department and us and the CPRB. So I'm hoping that we do better in the future. I was not pleased with the outcome last month.
Any other discussion or comments or questions regarding current status of the IDOT traffic study?
I guess I have a question. Some of those missing pieces of information, the missing information that, well, start again. When I read that summary of the by the statistics student, I was amazed at how unhelpful it was, and I felt there were certain questions that really do need to be answered, and we're kind of, in my naive mind, there was sort of promise that there would be some useful information teased out, and it doesn't seem that it really was that didn't reveal much to me, and I don't think it, and therefore it kind of fell flat I think in the meeting, because it didn't. The questions that are raised still seem to be as much unanswered as ever. But it's obviously a very important problem, and is there anything more we can do to, besides what Todd has already outlined, to fill in the blanks and help us make sense of it?
I think we should talk in the next few months about possibilities of, getting a more professional analysis of the data that we've got, but I think part of that also includes what data don't we have? I mean, the fact is we don't have population data for our sorted police beats. We don't have driver data for our sorted police beats. I don't even know if we have driver data for the cities themselves overall. I don't know how we would go about collecting, for instance, how many hours of driving within city limits do people of different races participate in. I don't know if that's even data we could conceivably get out of the state if anything like that is gathered. Todd is shaking his head with
part of the sort of run-up to this, and part of, I think, at least a small part of the presentation, was a very brief discussion on the different types of methodology that could be used to get at that data. And some of them are just cost prohibitive, some of them are extremely resource intensive, some of them. So, I mean, and actually, and this kind of rings true, a conversation I had with Alex Weiss, he said at some point you have to sort of get beyond the data, and which is strange for me to be saying this, because I am, admittedly someone who gets very much into the information and wants to get the information right. But at some point you have to step back and sort of look and say, okay, what are the general trends that we're seeing? The general trends that we're seeing, without a doubt, are that the disparity is being driven by certain geocodes, by a very limited number of geocodes as compared, relatively speaking, to the whole. Those are areas of very, very high traffic, and also are lots of stops and heavy disparity. And the questions, I think, and I just want to reiterate this as we go forward, the questions that we need to be asking, specifically in those neighborhoods where this is most impactful for the citizens there and for the community there, is let's dialogue about police presence in your neighborhoods. In this neighborhood, let's talk about police presence. Is it too much? Do you feel like you're living in a police state? Or do you feel as if this is the level of policing that is appropriate in order to have you to feel safe, person who's lived here for 25 years?
And to reiterate something that we talked about yesterday, but I think was useful, it would be useful for everyone to hear because we spoke about exactly this. I suspect that we also have to take into some account of expectations of the people living in those neighborhoods. That is, I betcha that if I had in my neighborhood the level of police presence that exists in certain other neighborhoods in the city of Urbana, that my neighbors would be out of their minds. What is going on and why are you here and what kind of intrusion is this? And part of that has to do with the current level of crime in the neighborhood that I live in. Part of that has to do with the expectation of the folks living in that neighborhood that we generally don't see police unless there is an incident, unless there is a call, and maybe the expectations are different in different neighborhoods. So I absolutely agree. I mean, to a greater extent, we have to not worry about what the statistics are per se when we see a general trend already occurring. We don't have to go deeper into those statistics to figure out.
And I think maybe I'm making that point particularly in light of, I certainly think we can get to the man hours per stop.
Sure.
Absolutely can get to that. In light of population statistics for small geographic areas, in light of knowing precisely what driving patterns are, those are just things that we're not going to have.
Right. And we already sort of know, we have a good idea, given the data that we've got, what those patterns are without having specific, down detailed statistics on that. But I do want to say that, even though I think you're right that the vast majority of stops of African American drivers, for instance, occur in a particular beat in Urbana, I also want to know what exactly do we have an idea of the general population makeup of, for instance, the West Urbana neighborhood, and is it wildly disproportionate in the number of stops in that neighborhood? Because even if it's close to what we would think is the overall number, if more than 50% of the African American population lives in a particular area, but 25% of the stops in a different neighborhood are African American stops, that's surprising. So even if we do concentrate on stops in a particular neighborhood, like, is it beat 61 instead of, I didn't want to use the number and get it wrong.
Most of them are in beat 61. There are some in beat 64.
Right.
But most of them are in beat 61.
But I don't want that to be the only place we look for where there might be problems.
I'd like to ask, I'm assuming that I wasn't able to attend that meeting, of course, but I'd like to ask, I'm assuming that we understand that there's already been a lot of research done on, including the famous, that report, Driving While Black, and that there are people in our community and the faculty who have done research on this. And it's when we say we want to know why, that there is a body of literature, and there are people who are working on it, maybe not this particular neighborhood, but that have some, I don't know, it might be nice to hear some of their insights. Maybe that's been done and I missed it.
I personally think collecting that data would be great, and getting those folks to come and talk to us. I think we on the commission have a pretty good idea of much of the content of those studies, although certainly collecting them together would be great.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, so we're proceeding from that point then.
Right. No, I agree.
that we understand, we have this sort of common understanding of sort of like the mechanics of things going on. Has anyone done any research on with policemen themselves, like oral interviews?
I don't think we know that information. The Urbana Police Department, police in general?
Well, I'm just thinking that, okay, let's say if we're looking at a particular beat in a particular
Okay.
area, I mean, even if I'm just saying, if I were some sort of police supervisor, chief or whatever, and I knew that, I would probably want to be really on top of it and, be talking to them quite frequently as to, sort of like what's going on, what's the situation. Because it seems to me that it would be obvious that sooner or later, whether it's other citizens in the town or the residents of that neighborhood or a human relations commission, people are going to be asking questions, especially, at this time in our lives, where people are asking, why these kind of things are going on in one neighborhood and not in another.
Well,
I mean, is there sort of like a standard police explanation? Oh, there's just a lot of crime? Or, I mean, I always wonder, like, how do they know who to stop? I mean, do they have, like, some sort of special vision that they can pick drivers out? Or is it just neighborhoods in general?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm not exactly sure that we have answers to those questions, but actually, to be honest with you, I'm hopeful that, for instance, if this task force, if I don't necessarily want to classify it as that, but if this group comes together, I think this is the type of discussion that would be fruitful with the chief over the course of several months to really get a feel for what's going on, and not just from the police perspective, but I think it's important to get the perspective of the individuals who are on the commissions and boards. Because, for instance, there are ways that you all will have at looking at the information and questions that you have that will not necessarily have occurred to the police department or even to me. And I think that is the point of sort of the partnering and the collaboration over a period of time. It's sort of mutual education, and it's also sort of expanding the perspective of all of the individuals involved. So again, I think that it seems like a very reasonable thing to do, to choose a couple of commission members from here, from the Civilian Police Review Board, maybe again also maybe, I'm not sure, Neighborhood Safety Task Force or somewhere else, to sit down on a regular basis and to discuss these matters with the police department and to sort of, again, expand everyone's perspective and understanding.
Other questions or comments? All right, let's move on to staff report. Todd.
Okay, well, let's get started. So, let's start with the EEO. I need to point out a couple of things. In our last meeting in June, we looked at Farnsworth Group, and there was a request to review Farnsworth Group. Part of the problem with Farnsworth Group is that the data that was reported, there was basically I fat-fingered some of the data. And so instead of reporting 308 in the previous period, their total employees, it was like 70 or something like that. And so there was this wild fluctuation. And so now you have the corrected data. What you can see here is that they've lost one African American, they've lost 2 Latinos, they've lost 1 Asian, and they've gained a Native American. The numbers aren't great. They're just not great. I'm not exactly sure I would anticipate that you all would want to review this one, though, in the same way that you've reviewed the others. Of course, you may decide differently, but I wanted to point that out. The second thing I wanted to point out is that there was a error that was made with Berkey's store in that they are actually approved through April of 2012. They don't require approval at this point. They have the previous approval. You'll see them in the spring of 2012. I'm looking to see if there's anything else. Obviously, A&R you've already dealt with, so you can kind of ignore that. Hair Construction at the very bottom was a recent ad, and I wanted to point that out to you. I also want to point out in regards to Hair Construction, that's how you pronounce it, Hair, that they've actually agreed to a compliance plan, because when I got it in, I said, hey, these numbers, not looking all that great. Would you agree to talk to me? And I think it was Max Hair actually came to my office, had a very good meeting with me, said anything that we can do, we will do. And when I sent him the compliance plan, he sends that back, filled in, said we are about doing this in terms of compliance. And also with the additional materials that he provided. So, and you can see here, he's also provided a narrative explanation, a letter that provides a narrative explanation of some of the turnover that's occurred in their company over the last 2 years. And I had indicated that I thought that that would be helpful for you in making your decision. So I'm open to any questions that you may have. As always, these recommendations are subject to your review discretion.
Six renewals, one newbie, looks like. Does anyone have any questions for either the renewals or the new certifications? Or is there a motion on the floor?
I've got one question on one renewal, which is Clark Dietz. The numbers were steady for total population. The African American numbers dropped by half.
So that's from 6 to 3.
From 6 to 3, with a total population of 140 odd. The Asian population dropped from 10 to 6. The Latino population stayed steady at 1. The female population, do we have that on here?
Went up by 5.
Down by, it grew by 5.
It grew by 5 from 24 to 29. And the staff recommendation is
1 year.
for one year. And it was 2.
Yes. So
Back in
previously
2006.
they were right in the number range where you generally give a 2-year. Currently, they're in the number range where you generally give a 1 year. And I'm looking at sort of the percentage that they're at currently, which relatively speaking, compared to the other contractors, it's still not the worst that we've seen, and actually it's not all that bad comparatively speaking. Also, even with the fluctuation in the numbers, again, you did see some increase in the number of women that were hired on. So I took all of that. Of course, you all could move for 6 months.
And O'Neill went up by tenfold in their employees, and SAC doubled?
Let's see. That is my understanding. I haven't gone back and called them to double check on that. A lot of times I'll have time to call the contractor and say, your numbers have ballooned over the last several months. Can you tell us what's going on? I didn't have a chance to do so in these two.
Other questions or alternative suggestions or comments? Or do we have a motion on the floor?
Oh, one more quick question. In Stituform, the 2 year is due to low population?
In pseudoform?
In Stituform, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of low population and a decent minority total.
Right. The overall population dropped to 37, and the minority total was
Pretty steady.
pretty steady.
Lost one.
Okay, I'll go ahead and make a motion for Utility Services Authority for 1 year, for Clark Dietz for 1 year, for In Situ Form for 2 years, for Farnsworth for 1 year, and for Hair Construction for 1 year, and I'd like to defer the other two for another motion. So move those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in Fran? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same.
And I just guess for O'Neill and for Zach Construction, the numbers are so wildly different. I'd like to defer these to next month unless there's some reason that we really need to handle them tonight.
What I'll suggest is this, if you want to do some type of contingent motion, where if we call and confirm that these numbers are indeed accurate, it would be good to have your sort of thoughts on these numbers as they stand. That way we can go ahead and administratively approve them if they are verified.
So, O'Neill, I'm not even I don't know what the heck to do with O'Neill, because if the population went up by tenfold, the number of women only went up by 11, and the number of African Americans dropped. I want to hear a lot about that, so no, I'm not comfortable with that. Sac Construction,
Didn't it go up for O'Neill? Are you seeing it the right way? It went up 6%. That's pretty good.
it went up.
Went from 1 to 7.
Oh, I looked at the percentage column. Okay.
So it's an
Yeah,
improvement.
because it's a larger amount.
Their overall percentages.
It's the overall percentage. It was not the percentage change, which I always cross up. Thank you. So women did go up. African Americans did. Okay.
Latino, it went up in every category but Native American.
Okay. So yes. So I think some sort of contingent
Motion.
approval would be fine for this. So if these are the correct numbers, contingent, so the motion will be to approve for 1 year O'Neill.
2 years for Sac.
Yes, if the numbers are correct, is that right? Yeah, if the numbers are correct, then approval of O'Neill for 1 year, Sac Construction for 2 years.
Is there a second? Discussion?
So the story here is we will do this contingent approval. If the numbers are exactly as we see, then you'll just go ahead and sign the
Right. If they're not, you'll see them next month.
that sounds fine.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? All right, Todd, moving on.
So, as you dig through your packet, I draw your attention to the substantial context. Since June, we've had, I think it's a total of 5. And in 2 of those complaints, or in 2 of those issues, complaints were filed. In one of them, there was no follow-up by the complainant. One was referred to IDHR. There was a housing disability, which is resolved, and then a race one that we just had, where we ultimately do not have jurisdiction. And, well, we're going to see that soon enough. Any questions on those?
Nope.
All right. Next, looking at case status for, this should say August 2011, I'm sorry, it says June. The UC 100707 is currently in settlement negotiations. There was an initial finding in that particular case, and so the settlement negotiations are occurring subsequent to that finding. So if there is a settlement, my understanding is that if we were involved at the point at which it is settled, is there a question?
The initial finding itself, do you publish that to the commission?
No. Not
Okay.
until, yeah, that doesn't come until we actually file for public hearing, at least that's
Gotcha.
my understanding. So if we ultimately are part of that, the ultimate settlement that is reached, then you will be seeing that settlement. If for some reason both sides decide to go outside of us in order to execute that settlement, then you will not. So, UC 1000908 is a race case. That complaint was withdrawn, so it'll be gone the next time you see this report. UC 101009, that fact finding has actually been completed, so you can. It wasn't completed at the time when I filled this out, but it's since been completed. UC 110201, that fact finding has been completed, but this one and the very next one, it's the same employer. The second one is a derivative from the underlying, which is the first. There is an additional witness interview that's pending, and I'm trying to get that interview. There are also a couple of other witnesses. What happens, I request to speak to particular individuals at an employer. If they don't make those individuals available, either because they no longer work there or because for whatever reason they choose not to make them available, then I reserve the right to go and find those witnesses and talk to them outside of the presence of the employer and their counsel. And so we're currently working on that. You'd be amazed at how effective that can be at getting people to show up. UC 110602 is a retaliation case in employment where we're currently awaiting the initial response. And then UC 110603 is a is a race, sex, age, and retaliation where we are currently awaiting the response. Questions? If you look at, we also provided a spreadsheet with the budget, and currently you can see there was a donation to PACE for one of their programs, and also a donation, or not a donation, previously approved payment to the statistician for the executive summary. I think that's all of the debits that we have currently. Now, also I've been informed that there has been a request, even though we don't have it in writing, and I was just informed of it today, that the commission donate, I believe it's $250 to the, I think it's called the Champaign-Urbana Black Chamber of Commerce. They have a networking function that occurs, I believe, quarterly, and I think this month it's occurring at N2. I believe that Champaign is considering helping to co-sponsor that. They've asked whether or not we would do so. I told them I would at least broach the subject with you. I obviously did not have time to put it on the agenda, but if it's something that you seem to be amenable to, then I will feel comfortable taking it out of my budget and then coming back to you and asking that you reimburse my budget for it. So,
I mean, one of the things we've asked for in the past with requests for these kinds of donations is how it furthers our mission. I've got an idea, given the Black Chamber of Commerce, how it might further our mission, but...
and that's exactly what we asked for with the writing. And what this would be is it is an event that is meant to cultivate African-American, and mainly African-American business, particularly small entrepreneurial business locally. And so it's an opportunity for networking. It's an opportunity, basically, I don't want to say for a head count, but basically if you're unfamiliar with the community, with the opportunities, and with the black entrepreneurs in the community, you can go and really sort of get a good immersive environment there where you can network with them. Also, I believe there are functions, obviously, that the Black Chamber of Commerce engages in that are well beyond social and more informative and training for black entrepreneurs. So. But I can bring that written information with me the next time also.
Speaking for myself, I think I would be fine. And this was a request for $200?
I think it's $250.
And we have 1,200. No, we have. Was it 1,200 in our sponsorships and grants budget at the moment? I think that would. I would personally be perfectly comfortable with that. And with what I expect to see in a letter next month, would expect to pass such a resolution, but might want to get the input of other commissioners.
Okay? We're all okay. Aisha, sound good?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
All righty, thank you.
I don't have anything else.
All right, any announcements? All righty, then we are adjourned.